California's Gold is produced in association with KCET Los Angeles and is seen statewide on California Public Television. This series is endorsed by the California Teachers Association, the California School Boards Association, and the California Library Association. To get there, you travel a road that countless millions of others have traveled over the years. People from all over the world interested in seeing this magnificent place for themselves. And there it is in the distance, just a speck on a mountaintop when you first see it. The road to it just keeps going up and through this beautiful countryside on our state's central coast. Our destination, in case you haven't guessed by now, spectacular Hearst Castle, which takes up an entire mountaintop and is legendary in its beauty and its lore. But we were heading up the mountain not just to see the castle itself, but to find out about another less well-known and appreciated part of its history. We were in search of its flowers, its trees, its walkways, its fountains, all the elements that make the landscape architecture of the castle so spectacular. All of it a collaborative effort between Hearst himself and his architect, Julia Morgan. And as we would soon discover, the landscape of Hearst Castle is itself very much a part of California's gold. Okay, we have arrived at Hearst Castle. We're walking up the stairway, and Vicki, I feel like I'm coming here for the weekend, for a big party, but that's the way you're supposed to feel coming up those stairs, isn't it?
Because these are exactly the stairs that the guests used when they arrived, Huell.
So this is the way the guest, and look at this. Now that makes a good first impression.
Indeed it does.
Because driving up the driveway, that's a long driveway to get up here.
It's about 6 miles.
And a lot of foliage on both sides of the road. And now that I'm, concentrating on landscape in my mind, was all of that planted by Hearst?
It was, and the trees were brought up already good size in at least 10-gallon cans, the conifers and things, to create all of those groves that you passed on the road.
So what was here before? What kind of foliage was here before?
Well, there were 3 things, really: oak trees and laurels, and rattlesnakes. I guess we can consider rocks, too. That would make it 4.
And that's it. Everything
it.
else was brought here by Hearst.
Everything else was brought here in a truck from the bottom of the hill to the top.
Wow. All right, we're walking. Well, look, there's not a bad view anywhere here. And again, just something like this. I know we're going to see a lot more beautiful things than this, but boy, when you start looking for it, the flowers are everywhere.
He had 1,000 roses. He said, "Dear Miss Morgan, I like a lot of fine roses," and there are roses everywhere on the hill.
So we had Julia Morgan, his architect/landscape architect, plant all of this. So the palm trees, for example, they weren't here.
No, and they came in already good size. These California palms and then the tall Mexican fan palms were already several feet high when they arrived in 1920s.
Look at the statement the palm trees make up beside the towers of the castle. I mean, that is quite a statement right there.
And they do make a statement, Huell. There are 2 great sounds in a Spanish garden, and they're both here at Hearst Castle: the wind in the palms and the trickling water of fountains.
The trickling sound of water in a fountain, and if by cue, magically the fountain appears. And this is an absolutely beautiful fountain, surrounded, once again, when you're looking for them, by all of these trees. Now, this is a magnolia?
This is a Magnolia grandiflora, southern magnolia, and that was planted in Mr. Hearst's time.
So that would have been planted by Mr. Hearst. Now, there's an oak tree. That wouldn't have been planted. That would have been here already.
That is a native California live oak, a Quercus agrifolia, but there's a hitch on that tree, Huell, and that is it hasn't always been in that spot. It used to be right where this white statue is.
Really? So what did they do? They moved it?
Yes, it's a marble statue of the water nymph Galatea that was made in the 1880s by an Italian sculptor, Leopoldo Anziglione, and the tree was right behind it and dropping leaves in the water, and so they moved the oak out of the way. They never cut a native oak tree down here.
I was going to say, that's the story, is that they moved an oak tree rather than cutting it down, and they didn't have to go to all the time and expense of moving it. They could have just as easily cut it down.
And this was in 1928 that they moved it, and it entailed putting a big concrete basin like a giant flower pot around the entire root system and using winches and rollers to move a tree that was 200 years old and weighed tons.
Boy, this really sets the stage right here. This is really what it's all about when you come up here. Look at this view looking out from the castle, and that was part of what placing it here was all about, wasn't it?
Yes, actually, William Randolph Hearst knew this landscape better than any other since he'd been coming here since he was a small child. He was 2 years old when his father, George Hearst, first bought this ranch property in 1865. His mother, Phoebe Apperson Hearst, continued to add on to it, and William Randolph Hearst himself did. And it's a great view, Huell, but especially good because he owned it as far as you can see into the distance.
Wait a minute. He owned all of this.
He owned all the land to the mountain in the distant horizon called Mount Junipero Serra.
So did he purposely buy all of this land so there would never be anything to ruin his view?
When he called it the ranch at San Simeon, he was thinking about a very large landscape, over 250,000 acres, 450 square miles, and recently a good portion of it, which is still retained by the Hearst Corporation, was saved and is going to never be developed. The coastline went to California State Parks. The ranch land is a cattle ranch. So it's a wonderful thing to see this much of California looking the way it looked in the 18th, 17th, or 16th century.
And look out here. Now here's another beautiful view with the big tall palm trees and then all of this rich, rich foliage here. His roses, which he loved. The way it all integrates in is just, can we go down here? I guess we can.
Absolutely. And Julia Morgan was planning these sight lines so that we would see these magnificent views. Now, north to south, east to west. Her background was that she was the first woman to graduate from the world's finest architecture school, the École des Beaux-Arts, the School of Fine Arts in Paris. It had been established in the 17th century, and they had never admitted a woman until she applied in the 1890s. She got her diploma from there in 1901. It was a worldwide achievement. But she learned there about European art, European architecture, and also design. And so the design is so skillfully set up so that we're looking at the sight lines, these charming informality of the plantings, and then also these beautiful formal courtyards that you enter into the cottages.
Now, these are where the guests would have stayed. Do you know that this is the way the gardens looked back then?
We have not only hundreds of photographs, we have oral histories among the staff and the guests, and the head gardener here started working for Mr. Hearst in 1934 and stayed 58 years until his death in 1992. So the gardens look very much now, Huell, the way Hearst and Morgan wanted them to look.
How many gardeners did he have? I'm afraid to ask.
He would have, it would depend on the season, but he'd have 15 or 20 working full time, and we have about half that.
Because this is a full-time job. Look at the beauty of these gardens, and it looks beautiful there, but then when you look back where we've just walked from, you keep seeing these beautiful, beautiful landscapes, these vistas. Everything was, they thought of it from all the different angles, didn't they?
Well, we're very fortunate to have 1,000 letters that William Randolph Hearst and Julia Morgan exchanged, and nearly 10,000 drawings telling this story. So we know that he not only bought the art, but together they determined the locations of the pieces.
So they would have conferred and decided that here in this rose garden would be placed this piece of statuary.
This statue of Europa by Fritz Bain. Actually, Hearst bought it after he began to build here, and they placed it there in the late 1920s.
Now here comes a tour right here. Are there tours of the gardens themselves?
There are, and visitors love these gardens. We're open every day of the year except Christmas, Thanksgiving, and New Year's Day. And Tour 4 is a tour that just focuses on San Simeon's gardens.
Wow, how have I missed the gardens all of these years that I've been coming up here? I've been so fascinated by the buildings themselves.
Well, William Randolph Hearst loved art and he loved architecture, but as I've studied it for 30 years, Huell, I think the thing that he loved the most was this land. It was the longest association he had to a site. He loved the setting. He wanted to preserve the views, but he also wanted to enhance and augment them. This is like a little piece of Europe right in the middle of California.
Look at this. It's just so beautiful. You know, these gardens themselves are iconic, are as beautiful as anything you'll see anywhere in our state.
Indeed, and they are inspired by European gardens. Like Italian gardens, they have terraces and views. Like Spanish gardens, they have winding brick pathways and low fountains. What they don't have is lawns. There's not a blade of grass up here, Huell. It's all miles of hedges, shady little nooks with fountains, and lots of citrus trees, like you'd find in a garden in the Mediterranean.
This beautiful fountain with the water coming out of the mouth of a lion, and there's a story here.
As always, Huell, William Randolph Hearst would change his mind. This fountain used to be up higher on the terrace, and they moved it in the late 1930s. Julia Morgan said about him as a client, he does suffer from a great changeableness of mind, but makes up for that by letting me change mine now and then.
So he decided to move the lion fountain from, where was it, right here?
It was right here by this piece called Venus Gazing at Her Reflection.
So I guess when he made his mind up to move something, it got moved, didn't it?
They felt the scale was better down there. A tree had died, and so they moved it. And there are 5 separate levels in this garden, or as Julia Morgan described it, endless steps and terraces. That's what happens when you build on a hillside.
Let's go up the steps, because we're standing now. Look, there's little pathways and steps everywhere heading up to the main building, but all through this area. And this used to be down there, and the lions used to be here, and he moved them.
Exactly right. There's no part of this that he didn't think about, reconsider, and usually change, because nothing was more important to him than the grounds at the castle.
We're never going to get out of this area right here. We're now going down another path. There are lots of paths here. Here's the payoff right here. Look at this. This is the $5 million, excuse me, not $5,000 shot right here. This pool is called
the Neptune Pool, and this view we're getting of it right now, Huell, is what the guests would get. When they first arrived, they came toward the top of the house and descended terrace after terrace until this opened out before you, this incredible pool. Now, pools have always been a part of Mediterranean gardens, but they used to be just ornamental. William Randolph Hearst and Julia Morgan made this not just beautiful, but functional. This was a swimming pool. They heated it year-round with kerosene oil-fueled boilers. It's 345,000 gallons of water. They heated it up. It's 3.5 feet deep in the shallowest and 10 feet deep on the deepest side, and they swam in it all the time. And yet it's exquisite.
How excited would you be if you were a guest here and you stood here for the first time and looked out at this, and then of course looked out at all this land? Now, are these, well, obviously these, what are these? These were imported.
These Italian cypress trees were brought in to be living columns to complement the ancient Roman columns in the temple of the swimming pool.
So you got the living columns, you got the, that looks like an ancient.
Yes, actually it is. Those are around 2,000-year-old columns, the 6 in the temple.
And then back in the background, these plantings back here. Now, would these trees back here have been planted up on this little knoll here?
Everything on that distant hill was planted, except just to the right of the temple, a stand of oaks. And they put the temple right in front of those oaks. Again, the native trees. They never cut those down.
Now, did they plan on things growing over the years? Because Well, I mean, this oak, how old is this oak right here?
This oak is at least 250 years old and maybe even older. It's another one of our coastal live oaks. And when Hearst and Julia Morgan first began to walk up here and plan things out, the first thing they did was put numbers on these oaks, transfer the locations to drawings, and then build around the trees. This is the smallest guest house called the House of the Mountains, and it was built behind this magnificent tree.
So once again, they saved the tree, built the house behind the tree rather than take the tree out.
That's right.
Wow, and look at this tree. It's magnificent today. They saved it and built around it. Way off in the distance there, this beautiful big stone peak. Did Hearst name that?
No, it was named already. It's called Burnett Peak.
And it was named after?
A miner, because this area was used for mercury mining right around the time George Hearst bought the property in the 1860s. But they never mined here. He was a miner by profession, gold, silver, and copper. But he left this land. He didn't mine here. He ran cattle on the property.
William Randolph Hearst's father.
That's right.
Because we sometimes forget he didn't buy this. His father bought it.
That's right. He inherited it in 1919.
And the reason I stopped here to talk about this in the first place was that this is part of the natural landscape, and everything is framed so that you'd stand here at the pool and look out at Burnett Peak. That wasn't by accident either.
No, William Randolph Hearst camped here in childhood, and he wrote to his mother, "I love this ranch." He loved the sea and the mountains. He said, "I love the hollows in the hills, the shady places in the creeks, the hot, brushy hillsides, the fine old oaks and the canyons." So he knew this land very well.
He knew every inch of this land. So he knew that if you stood here after a swim, you'd look out and see Burnett Peak.
Indeed he did.
Casa del Sol. More steps, more buildings, more landscape, more fountains. I hadn't realized just how many fountains there were at this mansion.
Yes, and William Randolph Hearst said he wanted fountains that fount. That's the idea of a Mediterranean garden.
Fountains that what?
Fountains that fount.
In other words, he wanted water.
Yeah, that's the idea of a Mediterranean garden.
No, wait a minute, there's no water there.
they've turned it off just for cleaning.
All right, so there was a constant. This is part of what the ground crew was always doing. Cleaning, repairing, maintaining all of these fountains.
Well, everything, actually. You know, Hearst and Julia Morgan left us quite a creative legacy, but we in the Parks Department maintain it. And there are hundreds of us working here to keep this place beautiful every day of the year.
I'm going to see how much knowledge you have about this place. How many fountains are there up here?
I think there are 14.
14, and they all operate except when they're shut down to be cleaned or maintained. And this is called Casa del Sol because in the afternoon, the full afternoon sun hits it.
And you could be at the windows on the balcony and watch the sun set on the Pacific Ocean.
Oh, wow. This must have been a favorite place to be housed when you came up here as a guest.
Absolutely.
That's the room I want, right up there, right by the balcony. You're quiet. You're not. No, you're not offering it to me.
I'm thinking, dream on, Huell.
The biggest planter boxes I've seen anywhere in California. These take the prize.
These planter boxes were created when they planted these Phoenix canariensis, the Canary Island date palm, in the winter of 1932.
Now, when they planted these in 1932, they weren't this big.
No, but as William Randolph Hearst said to one of the construction workers, we're building for 1,000 years. They'd bring in mature plants, but the fact is, Huell, everything looks now, in our 50th anniversary of a California state park, the way William Randolph Hearst and Julia Morgan wanted it to when they put it in.
Oh, wow. So this is the way he envisioned it would look someday, but he never lived to see this.
That's right. He was thinking of us.
Wow. Well, I got to tell you, we're walking in this direction for a reason. And here it is right here.
The earliest letter we have, one of the earliest, from Hearst to Julia Morgan says, "Dear Miss Morgan, the main thing at the ranch is the view. Believe me, it was a lot more trouble to build up here than it would have been to build down there, but that's a magnificent view of a natural bay, San Simeon Bay. And that's how William would come in with his parents when he was a boy and climb up this mountain by horseback and camp at the top of the hill and look down at that beautiful landscape."
When he came up here as a boy, there was nothing here. Do you think even as a boy, he maybe visualized or dreamed that someday he wouldn't have any way of knowing that someday he would build this?
Oh, I think he did know. The first time he went to Europe, he was 10 years old. He saw Windsor Castle and said to his mother, "I think I should like to live there." So he was planning this for a long time, and it was only when he became, in 1919, the owner at age 56, that he began to build here. And of course, the landscape was something he knew and loved, and what he wanted to do was beautify it, keep all the beauty it had, and enhance it with all these lovely trees.
Look out here. Look at the trees. Just look at where you start up here with the old oak, but then you sweep all the way down, all the way around. Everything just fits together into this beautiful, beautiful picture. Now this is exciting because we're traveling now, we're walking down this path to a secret place that is not on the guided tour. Very few people know this is here, but this was a very important part of the Hearst Castle story.
Well, this is a story that has a lot of romance in it, Huell. The romance of William Randolph Hearst and his companion Marion Davies. They were here 30 years, together. The romance he had with the land. And though he and Julia Morgan never had a romance, there was a passion to their work relationship. So anyway, this was a very romantic hilltop, and it has places like this tucked away bench where I imagine you might want to meet somebody for a romantic assignation under the trees and far from the view of anything else in the estate.
The castle is right up there, but this is tucked. You'd have to know this was here to get here.
That's right. And just wander away if you wanted to get lost with somebody. And also, it's like a trip back in time because the landscape looks just as it would if we were in the 19th century.
Yeah. What was this called? Did it have a name?
Just a little bench. It's not even on any of the letters. It doesn't show up in any of the drawings. It's just a little secret hideaway that's here.
Do you think he and Julia Morgan placed this here?
Oh, I do. There was one letter that he wrote where he said that he wanted a part of the garden, he said, to be for young lovers or maybe old ones.
Another fountain, another statue. This is gold over bronze, and it's
the first rose.
The first rose. And this is another, is this a guest house?
Right. This is Casa del Mar. It has a beautiful view of the ocean.
Yeah, look at this. I think you never get tired of these views. This is just, talk about $1 million view. This is a $10 million, $100 million view. And then right down here, of course, there had to be another statue, and this one is called?
It's called the Fairy Princess, and this little nymph, these are by Adolf Daumiller, made in 1922. This little nymph is holding a small frog in the palm of her hand. He's wearing a crown, and she's just getting ready to kiss him.
We're walking under a blooming magnolia tree. We're surrounded with all kinds of flowers, and why are we walking down this? This looks almost like a road.
Well, they never drove cars on it, but it was a walking path. It's called the Esplanade.
Esplanade. And what was the idea of the Esplanade?
The Esplanade draws a ribbon around this hill. It connects all three of the cottages to the main house.
Boy, look at this. This is beautiful. And you know what? It smells good. Is it because of the magnolia?
It's because of the citrus, Huell.
The citrus. Well, there's citrus right there. It's beautiful citrus, and it makes quite a statement. They must have had fresh orange juice every morning.
Well, he had orange groves, and they used the orange groves for the table. But in the gardens, they didn't pick the fruit. He wanted it on the trees because he wanted all those Easterners to see what the land of sunshine and paradise really looks like.
It was all for effect.
That's right. They left it on the trees, and so do we today. So we have some very happy squirrels. They're what eat it when it falls.
Boy, look at this. This is such a beautiful time of the day, kind of late afternoon here in the summertime, and we're kind of tracing our way back.
How big is this whole area?
Well, the formal gardens are about 16 acres. The entire landscaped area is 120 acres here on the top of the hill. And you see how it looks like a Mediterranean hill city.
Yeah.
Like a church right in the middle, little buildings around it, and everywhere you can look, flowers.
And here, right down here, this is kind of the way we came up those original stairs. And look, right over here, here are his beloved roses and all of these other flowering plants, which are
pansies and alyssum and some of the original roses.
And over here,
the lavender lantana and the roses, the sweetheart roses, climbing up the palm trees.
Boy, he did love roses, and he loved sculpted boxwoods too, didn't he?
Yes, and Eugenie, he loved lots of hedges. There are no lawns, but lots and lots of hedges. And as Julia Morgan put it, endless steps and terraces, because that's how you get a view, is you terrace a hillside.
Okay, we're looking at the fountain again, at the old oak trees again, and we've come up here to look out at the natural terrain and to look up at this beautiful, beautiful castle, this mansion. But I got to tell you, as beautiful as the mansion is, and that's really why so many people come here, we've learned today that there's a lot more to Hearst Castle than just the castle itself.
Well, we have 1,000 letters between Hearst and Morgan, and I'd say that more than half of them concern the plants. He was very interested because he knew, Huell, that you could build a house, but the way that you give it permanence, beauty, and grace is you add the plants. And he cared as much about the landscape and even more about the setting than any other thing on the hill, and so did Julia Morgan.
Well, we've seen it today. We've seen the natural landscape. We've seen the built-in landscape, the way it interacts with the buildings and the sculpture and the fountains and the pools. I think all of it together, the buildings themselves and the landscape, and there it is right out there. That kind of combines it all with the built landscape and the natural landscape of the Central Coast. All of this together here at Hearst Castle, very much a part of California's gold. William Hearst and Julia Morgan built this to be a legacy, and it is here today for all Californians to visit and enjoy and soak in all its beauty.
Our new friend, Victoria Kastner, who gave us this wonderful tour, has also written and published a beautiful book filled with the history and spectacular photographs of the gardens, the landscape of Hearst Castle, entitled Hearst San Simeon, The Gardens and the Land. It's available at the Hearst Castle Visitor Center, at bookstores everywhere, and online. Well, hello everybody, I'm Huell Hauser, and you know it doesn't get any more beautiful than the landscape at Hearst Castle. It is a true California treasure. And if you'd like to go on this adventure again, share it with family or friends, or perhaps donate a copy to your local school or library. It's available on DVD. All you have to do is call 1-800-266-5727, and we'll be glad to send it to you right away.